In this series, we'll be traipsing through nearly 50 years of Singapore art, meeting artists and experts along the way. I want to explore how and what the artworks or the artists can reveal and reflect about our nation. Could there be parallels or intersections between the nation and the artwork that's created within? $50 Singapore note. No, I'm not about to make it disappear. Right here, we have artwork from Singaporean masters on this note. Chen Wenxi's Two Gibbons Amidst Vines, and right above it, Chong Su Ping's Drying Salted Fish. Now imagine, every day thousands, no millions of these notes are transacted. They can be found everywhere. In banks, in coffee shops, in people's wallets, even under someone's bed. Yet many of us don't even notice we're carrying artworks from Singaporean masters in our pockets, including myself. Until now, that is. Images of the Singapore River mirror the evolution of a new nation. It is one where labourers toil day and night. The Singapore River has inspired generations of artists. And the image to begin with is Lim Cheng Ho's Singapore River. Lim Cheng Ho was a self-taught watercolourist, known for his numerous pictures of the Singapore River. He was a prominent figure among a group known as the Sunday Painters. They are a group of artists who held full-time jobs, but indulged in their passion for painting over the weekends. I am particularly drawn to this one that he painted in late 60s. I see this painting as the river at dawn, dreamy and full of possibilities.
I think Cheng Ho's art is characterized by his interest in the quality of light in his painting. The way in which light could be captured and registered as something that is shifting all of the time rather than still and static, unlike studio lighting. And the way he did this was to develop a pictorial aesthetic in which water and sky, water and clouds, water and mist, I think the mist was his own invention in his pictures, enabled him to refract the light, so that whether it is the midday sun or the twilight or the sunrise, there was always this ethereal illumination in his painting. And the Singapore River was one of the favored sites for him to develop these kinds of painting technologies in his art. That's why his art stands apart, and I think that's why his painting was seen as somewhat exemplary in the milieu of watercolor painters.
So that was also a popular spot for my father, Singapore River. At that time, Singapore River was a bustling river with all the tongkangs and boats. And in fact, when I was doing outdoor painting with his group of artist friends, quite a number of new artists wanting to paint with him. Some of them don't paint, they want to just watch him paint. And also, I think what fascinates the other onlookers and also fellow artists is the way he got the pictorial composition, very ideally set.
The Singapore River that Lim Cheng Ho painted isn't here anymore. That river and the life that it had and the one that I see in front of me are worlds apart. But why did the Singapore River feature so predominantly in the works of many artists?
It is quite conceivable to look at the Singapore River as one of the principal topics in those paintings which are dealing with landscapes in one form or another. Landscape understood as a picture of both human beings and nature plus natural forms and human forms, the intermingling of the two. And in that sense, the Singapore River featured prominently, largely because it was picturesque. It may not have been picturesque in terms of the developmental sense of what Singapore should be. In fact, it wasn't. As you know, they cleaned up the river, they relocated so many things out of there, and that brought the end of the story of Singapore River for painting. It no longer is interesting to produce a picture of the Singapore River. It does not have the vitality, the sort of dynamism, the kind of contrariness, the kind of liveliness. It may be unhygienic, but it was not unhygienic for pictures.
The Singapore River remained a source of inspiration for many artists during that time. Another self-taught watercolorist who captured images of the Singapore River is Idris Ali. A Sunday painter like Lim Cheng Hoe, he records the transformation of Singapore in his paintings through the decades since the early 1960s. Idris, thank you for meeting me. I noticed that you have a couple of pens in your pocket there.
Yeah.
Can I see one of them?
Okay.
Do you have this with you all the time?
I have it all the time.
Why is that?
Yeah, because it's very useful for me to record down all those subjects that I look at. And I like to record down on the sketchbook.
And how did you choose what to paint during that period?
At that time, there was a lot of boats, bumboats, junk. People working, carrying goods on the bed of the boats, everything. And then the building around it, all very busy, shop houses, people selling this, selling that, all quite busy. See? That is make look interesting at the Singapore River. Yeah, I like to paint those subjects because I worry they might disappear. See? So before it disappears, then I better record down all this.
Can I ask you about your Sunday painting sessions and how you interacted with the other artists there?
Every Sunday, I went to the Singapore River and do my watercolor painting. Yeah. On Sunday, you can see along the Singapore River, there's a lot of artists painting those bamboo, those shop houses, the river, oil painting, all mixed around. Sure, there are people there to paint already, including me.
Why would you say that your art over the past 50 years is important to Singaporeans today?
The painting that I did at that time is all the old painting that to preserve for the new generation. Yeah? So once this building all disappeared, then we can have this painting to show to the new generation.
Artists like Idris Ali have witnessed transformation of life along the Singapore River. Lai Fong Moi, one of Singapore's earliest women artists, paints this picture of the river. Her painting of the Singapore River stands in stark contrast to Lim Cheng Hoe's. It is one of labour and grit. Perhaps that's what it takes to build a nation, a dream, a vision, with a lot of sweat and toil. Sam Sui women, coolies, labourers, construction workers. They are the faceless heroes who toil to build the nation. Their efforts inspire paintings of the 60s and 70s. Chua Mia Tee's Workers in a Canteen was painted in 1974. The work has a photographic quality about it. With amazing details in this painting, I see the grains of rice, and I can almost smell the sweat of the workers. So tell me about your painting workers in the canteen. What was the inspiration for this painting?
我们会有去参观这个游龙区呀，然后去了解他们的生活。后来也一起吃午餐，觉得发现这个场面很值得把它画下来，一个有时代感，所以我动了这念头之后，我就画了很多速写，也拍了很多照片。那么根据这些东西组织成一张图画。通过各种各样的小细节来表现出这个工人们的生活，也是我们的现实主义的艺术家应该做的一些工作，来表现出社会的某一个时代、某一个层面。
To see Chua Mia Tee's work in that bigger picture, what strikes me about his work is how socially and historically engaged it is, how it attempts to capture the mood politically of what people were concerned about, what people were fighting for even, and having that sense of the times really. So I think his work has great historical significance, and I think he's able to capture that not from a top-down perspective, but really on the ground, identifying with the people who were directly involved in these events.
我觉得通过写实的方法，这个画面有一种真实感，让看画的人观众看了能够了解你所要表现的东西，表现你画家的思想，想要表达什么东西，他能够了解。
Another artist, Chua Tiak Ming, captures the spirit of the era in a different medium: photography. Chua Tiak Ming wasn't a professional photographer. He was in fact a school principal. And he was so enthusiastic about his work, he even had a darkroom set up in his own home.
I think the 1960s and 70s was a time where Singapore was undergoing change, where the workers themselves were facing that change in a very real way. As you can see from Chua's photography, he focuses a lot on the manual labourer and his craft, whether it's rearranging or drying planks, or whether he's involved in making cement. There is a very strong element of man and his environment, how in some cases he not only makes use of his environment, but even overcomes it. So I think that's a very heroic view of the worker in his work, and that comes out very strongly in his photographs.
In the spirit of nation building, Singapore was relentlessly forging ahead, perhaps not looking back to see the trail it left behind. What is the price of progress? Fragments of old Singapore have inevitably been lost. Lim Tze Peng's painting of Chinatown laments the change. Chinatown, once the heart and soul of the Chinese population. The best roast duck, the freshest produce and the finest fabric sat alongside brothels and secret societies and death houses. It was a place that was bursting with life. And Lim Tze Peng's paintings captured that life in a moment before the spirit and the landscape of the place changed. This is Mr. Ong, and we're here at ArtSave. Mr. Ong is a private collector of Lim Tze Peng's work. He has a great affinity for his work. You've been collecting Lim Tze Peng's work for about 20 plus years now?
Yeah, about 20 years now. And
Right.
This was my first piece that I bought it from him. And, it attracted me, a lot because when I was young, my father used to bring me to Chinatown, to have a very early, breakfast of tua pao, we call it. At that time, of course, it was 60 cents per piece,
Right.
And I enjoy it. And every weekend, I look forward to my father bringing me there. Yeah, that's why I have, very strong feeling for Chinatown. Yeah, especially this piece of, painting, really, if you look closer, you can see that the trishaw, rider, is actually squatting on the stool,
Yep.
eating his meal. And if you look even closer to this painting, you can see this lamppost. It's very unique.
Yeah.
You don't see this lamppost anymore. It was
is
during the
true.
British. And until today, I'm still collecting Chinatown paintings. It really, brings back a lot of memory.
From the mid-70s, when he started out doing his ink paintings, he decided to capture the local landscapes. There was a plan for urban renewal in Singapore. And this only came to fruition by about the mid-60s, when there were issues with the immigrant population, public housing, sanitation, all of these different types of issues that would affect a fledgling nation. And therefore, urban renewal started its sort of a very aggressive path by the late 60s. And by the mid-70s, it was one of those things where people were very affected, the community was very affected by it. And you could tell, because the policies for urban renewal were geared towards minimizing a lot of the old character of the landscape. And this included Chinatown and the Singapore River. This is how he came to, in his own words, aggressively document these two districts before urban renewal had completely transformed them. The foundations of his art were really about creating a relationship between himself and his surrounding landscape. Because he was very much an artist of the moment, and still is an artist of the moment, imbibing his environment, capturing all the sentiments of what has happened, what is probably what's going to happen in his artwork. It's his expression, it's his way of saying this is what it means to be Singaporean and a Singaporean artist.
I think one of the difficulties living in Singapore is a constant disappearance of memory, of personal memories, okay? Because the locations that you recognize, the location you are familiar with, disappears very quickly. So I think this kind of constant erasure of memory is very disturbing to people's sense of stability. When you go to an old place and it's completely new and you can't remember what is there before, right? Then you kind of feel a bit of your past kind of erased, not by yourself, but by the gesture of development and the state.
As parts of Chinatown gave way to urban development, people were rehoused in newly built Housing Development Board flats. The urban landscape was transformed. It was a time of cautious frugality, and people were still quite conservative in their outlook. But there was also a new generation of artists who had gone away to study and came back with new ideas. Ng Eng Teng was one such artist who came back with new visions and new ways of making art. I remember seeing this sculpture, Ng Eng Teng's Mother and Child, outside Far East Shopping Centre as a child myself, and being drawn to it, yet slightly afraid of its strange otherworldliness.
I always struggle to try to, force Eng Teng's work into a kind of Singaporean imaginary, because I think that they go beyond that. If you want to talk about his reaction to Singapore's, economic development, one could look at two of his public sculptures produced in 1974, called Wealth and Contentment. These two pieces always conceived as a pair, right? Response to the kind of material wealth that Singaporeans now find themselves with. And if you take a long look at them, one could also see the way in which Eng Teng was trying to look for a kind of wealth and contentment beyond the material means of them. Now that Singapore is, well on its way to achieving the kind of economic security, then where else can we look for wealth and contentment beyond just material means itself? Maybe he was in that sense prescient, and he could anticipate the fact that this was going to be a problem in the 80s, that already in 74, when he was commissioned by a bank specifically, he was already in some sense responding, albeit cheekily.
Tropical Rhapsody, completed in 1972, was perhaps an interesting juncture of his practice. On the one hand, it is an artwork that was commissioned and therefore indicating his status or his evolving status as an artist. Secondly, I think which is more important is that it allows him to engage his history, being part of NAFA, having studied at NAFA, being a student to artists like Chong Soo Ping and Georgette Chen, and ways in which he evolved or he could evolve as a sculptor, as a modern artist. I think that there's very little conversation what constitutes canonical pieces in Singapore art. How do we begin to think about the positioning of these artists in relation to one another? What is Eng Teng's relationship to the early artists that came before him, what is the relationship of his practice to the period and the artists that came after him. I'm not proposing a certain kind of a linearity between these groups of individuals, but rather as a way for us to begin to think about the possibilities in which we may shape stories and different stories at that.
The 70s brought in new technologies of art, new images of art, new methods of making art, and therefore new criteria, new values for appraising, appreciating, and judging art. So if you take all of these criteria and put them together, that is quite, in my reckoning, quite formidable to say that there was a shift. Thomas Yeo, Ng Eng Teng, Teo Eng Seng, Goh Beng Kwan, and so on. Were they ambitious? Did they have the intention to say, we are the new wave. We come with new visions, with new dreams, and new ways of making art? Yes, they did.
What we see in terms of this interrelationship between history, transformation of a nation, society, and the artist is that there is always that engagement, there is always that encounter between artists and the immediate events that are happening at that time.
I found that works of the Singapore River dominate the art scene in the 60s because it embodies the heart and soul of Singapore through the times. From this river, artists capture the true grit and toil of our pioneers, whose trails have become a window to our past. As Singapore pushes relentlessly ahead with development in the 70s, art reacts to what is lost. Its function as social critique takes on new and bolder forms as Singapore moves into the 80s.